Bishop Academy Books. Presenting The Children's Encyclopedia by Arthur May. Read by Sarah Bishop.
Chapter 1: Earth and Its Neighbors. The story of the boundless universe and all its wondrous worlds. What this story tells us: how still the earth seems on a moonless night. Yet the earth has never been still for a moment of time. We do not know how long it has been spinning, but for millions and millions of years it has been flying like a ball through space. It began as a cloud of fiery gas. It cooled and shrank, and at last it became hard and round like an orange. And as we now know, the earth is like a speck in a boundless universe, one of the smallest of 1,000 million worlds, all moving on and on in perfect order through space that seems to have no end. What are they like? Are they alive? Are little children playing there? Perhaps not. We do not know. But they have their place in God's great scheme of things, and here we will read all we can know of them until the day when our eyes shall see and our minds shall understand the marvelous purposes of God. The big ball we live on. The big ball we live on, with its mountains and rivers and seas and deserts and forests and plants and animals, is only a speck in the vast infinity of space. It is one of several balls, some bigger and some smaller, and all turning round the sun, which is much bigger than any of them. If the sun was hollow, over 1,000,000 balls, each the size of the earth, could be dropped into it. Yet the sun is only a star, and the reason it looks so different from a star is that we are nestled up close to it, and so can clearly see its broad face or disk. And there are many suns in space, millions of times as large as ours. Besides suns, and probably planets too, there are tremendous clouds of glowing substance known as nebula. So huge the earth in the middle of one of them would be like a pea in the Pacific Ocean. In space itself, the earth is quite lost. Think of the width and the breadth and the height of space. The sun seems a long way off, but its light takes only 8 minutes of flash to cross to us. Whereas astronomers who have been measuring the distances of stars have calculated that some of them are so far off that light, which travels 186,282 miles in a second, takes hundreds of years to reach us. An express train would take hundreds of millions of years to cover the distance. Even farther off than that there are stars. For every time a bigger telescope is made, new stars come into view. The Big Hale telescope on Mount Palomar has revealed thousands of stars out beyond the stars that were previously known. So little then is our big ball when we look at it amid the suns and nebula and the immensity of space. But we must not therefore think less of our earth. We who rush round the sun in such a wonderful chariot, with the stars millions of miles away shining into our eyes, must recognize that the earth's place amid the suns is a place of wonder and a place of honor. Men can now fly in a jet at 1,000 miles an hour, but what an adventure it is to go flying 1,000 miles a minute round the sun, companioned by Jupiter and Venus and Mars. To go flashing with the sun along pathless space towards some unknown goal. Life can never be a stupid and dull and sordid thing if we educate our imagination to realize through what a wonderful universe we are rushing. Think too of the marvelous making of our little world. It is interesting to watch a sculptor making a figure out of marble. or to watch a painter putting trees and hills and faces on canvas. But on our journey through space, we see a much more wonderful artistry at work. It was once thought that what we call empty space was not empty, but full of an invisible substance called the ether. It was thought an ether must exist to support sound, light, and other waves. It is true, sound waves can only be transmitted through some medium of matter. And this is why the moon, which has no atmosphere, is a world of deathly silence. But we know now that light waves and certain other radiations can travel freely through space without any medium. Imagine we are looking far into the heavens and suddenly we see a glowing cloud, millions of miles in diameter, which has blossomed out in space. When astronomers examine such a cloud with telescopes and spectroscopes, they discover it is composed chiefly of the two gases, hydrogen and helium. This does not seem very wonderful, perhaps, but chemists believe that all the elements in the world are built up of atoms of these two light gases. In the cloud, hydrogen and helium are being prepared to make all the other elements that go to make suns and planets. At this stage, the cloud is very thin, thinner even than the air we breathe, but as the gases form and as new elements are constructed, the cloud contracts or shrinks and grows denser and hotter. The chemical processes going on and the shrinking of the cloud both produce great heat, and so the cloud becomes a blazing sun like ours. But at a certain point, the heat leaks away faster than it is formed, and the sun cools. And as it cools down, heavier elements are formed. The gases become partly fluid and partly solid. We can see in space some suns which have reached this stage, and the spectroscope shows that they contain numerous elements, including iron and other metals. In the cloudy stage, astronomers call the sun a giant sun, and in the more condensed stage, they call it a dwarf sun. And finally, the dwarf sun cools down entirely and becomes a dead dark sun. That is a very brief sketch of how suns are made, but sometimes while suns are contracting, their surface breaks up and the fragments become planets revolving round them. Something of that sort happened to our sun, and the fragments grew into the planets, and one of the planets is our Earth. It is surely wonderful to think that the Earth was made out of a great cloud, and that at one time all its rocks and seas and animals and plants were nothing but hydrogen and helium gas. It is surely wonderful to think that a great power could bring so much out of so little. And one of the most wonderful things in the making of the Earth was the final steps that made life possible. At first, this big ball of ours was simply a globe of flaming gases and molten metals. As it cooled and it formed a solid metallic crust, and as the metal cooled and solidified and condensed, it squeezed out slag, as cooling iron in an iron foundry does. This slag formed the early crust of the Earth. And the amazing thing was that the crust contained iron and lime and sulfur and sodium and potassium, just those elements which were necessary to life. More amazing still, when the cooling crust cracked and the giant volcanoes spouted all over the world, out of the bowels of the Earth came steam which condensed into water and carbon dioxide gas, and so the Earth got rivers and seas and an atmosphere. After millions and millions of years of flame and fire, of seething and boiling and bubbling, there came out of this fragment of the sun exactly the right things to make life. The water, lifted and tossed by the air, broke down the crust into soil and mud, into the clay of life. All that is amazing and wonderful, but all would have been in vain if the sun had not been shining across space nearly 100 million miles away. When the sun broke up into bits and the bits went flying as fiery planets round it, it might have seemed an unfortunate accident. But if the sun had not flung forth the planets, there would probably be no living things in the solar system today. As it is often best for children to leave their parents and live their own separate lives, so it was best for the earth to be parted from the sun and go its own way. But the earth still revolved round the sun, and the rays of the sunlight still reached the earth, and it was these rays of sunlight that made living things, even as today they make food for us all. How living things were manufactured from the materials ready in the earth's crust and in its atmosphere, nobody knows. But it probably came about in this way. On the earth was the wonderful fluid water, with many substances dissolved in it, and the wonderful gas carbon dioxide, which we can see bubbling in a soda water siphon any day. On the gas dissolved in the water the sun shone down, and it has been proved that when the sun shines on such a solution, some of the rays form the poison called formaldehyde, and other rays manufacture starch out of the poison. And starch is perhaps the most important substance in the world in relation to light and life. It contains some of the energy of the sunlight, which made it, and this energy comes forth when oxygen is joined to it. When we burn starch, for instance, we get the sun's energy out of it in the form of light and heat. We know, too, that all the energy of living depends on starch food. The sun makes starch out of water and carbon dioxide in green plants. Animals eat the starch, and all life depends on the energy of the sun contained in that compound. All the tissues of living bodies are built out of it by the processes of digestion. Now, many people believe that life itself originated in some such way. First, the poison that in itself is destructive to life, then starch, then from this starch, the energetic substance of life called protoplasm. That may or may not be so, but it is certain that today all living things depend on the energy of the sun, and that without sunlight, life could not be. In many ways, this arrangement of a sun to put energy into the gas and water of the earth would seem to be the contrivance of a foreseeing mind. And it is really a much more complicated arrangement than it looks, for the sun's rays would not only make starch, but would slay all living things were it not that the atmosphere holds back most of the rays. Exactly the right rays are let through to make starch without destroying life. In some way, life began and the conditions on the planet were such that it multiplied and developed till now earth, air, and sea swarm with myriads of living creatures. Not only in starch do we enjoy the energy of the sun that was stored up in the starch of green plants for hundreds of thousands of years. Who could have imagined that all the decaying vegetation in ancient swamps and jungles would one day drive the machinery of unborn men? This decaying vegetation becomes coal and is used as fuel, and to generate steam, to turn the turbines which revolve electric generators. Coal and everything else is made up of atoms which have enormous stores of energy within them. And this energy we are beginning to use. So tremendous is the energy stored in the atom that used wisely it could perform all the work necessary for our lives. It can be transformed into electricity to light and heat our homes, drive our machinery, and propel our ships. Everything in this wonderful planet of ours seems to have been made for us, and in wise, far-seeing ways prepared for us. Think of glass and what it means to us. Think what the microscope and telescope have revealed to us. Think what eyeglasses mean to so many. Yet silicon, the element essential for glass, was collected for us in seawater by countless myriads of tiny sea organisms which made of it little glass shells, often of delicate beauty. Wonderful changes have taken place in our world since it first became the home of living creatures. Its crust has been broken and cracked and crumbled. Its ocean beds have been puckered up into mountain ranges. Continents have sunk beneath the seas. Most of the chalk of England was formed in the bottom of the sea, and the granite of Scotland is the remnants of mighty volcanoes. Even the Himalayas rose from the ocean, and the Dolomites were once coral reefs, and many parts of the Earth's surface have been alternately land and ocean floor. Earth has had its tropical periods too, when great forests and jungles grew in the polar regions. And it has had its ice ages, when almost all Europe was under glaciers. It has had its age of insects, age of reptiles, and age of mammals, its age of man. Yet evermore the earth has gone spinning round the sun, and evermore life has blossomed more richly. At first, its most wonderful blossom achievement, man, hardly knew where he was, and it was many ages till he discovered that the earth was a round ball spinning on its axis and revolving round the sun. At first, he naturally thought the earth was flat and that the sun went round it, but bold men who sailed about the world proved it to be round, and other clever men discovered the revolution of the planets. The spinning of the earth on its axis is a very strange thing, but the sun also spins, and all the other planets spin, and it is probable that it has meanings we do not understand. But some of its uses to us we do understand. It gives us alternatives of day and night, which help us divide our lives between activity and rest. It produces the tides, and it is the cause of some of the great regular winds which regulate and modify the climate of the earth. The earth does not spin quite upright, but is inclined a little on its axis, and this slanting of the earth as it revolves round the sun is the cause of the seasons in the north and south hemispheres. At one point in the earth's revolution, the North Pole is leaning towards the sun and the South Pole away from it. And at another point in its revolution, the South Pole is leaning towards the sun and the North Pole away from it. So we have a summer and winter alternatively in each of the two halves of the globe. During its revolution round the sun, the Earth turns on its axis almost exactly 365 times, and so the year has almost exactly 365 days. When we are talking of the wonders of the world, we must not forget the moon, which revolves round it once every 27 days. Some astronomers think that the moon is a bit of the earth, having been torn off by the tug of the sun from its molten earth ages years ago. Whether this was so or not, the moon was once much nearer to the earth than it is now, and was spinning rapidly on its axis. It must have raised great tides on the earth, which raised much greater tides on the moon, and slowed down its rotation so much it now always turns the same side toward us. Like the earth, it had great volcanoes spouting fire, and it must have been splendid as it rushed round the earth, dragging great molten tides after it. But it could not hold the gases and the water vapors within it as the earth did. It was too small to have sufficient gravitational force, and so, even though it had probably the same elements as the earth in its crust, it never managed to produce plants or animals. In time, this fragment of the earth got farther and farther from the earth, and in time it cooled down, and now it is like a piece of dry slag covered with huge extinct volcanoes. Could there be a more marvelous world than this planet of ours, spinning on its axis and racing round the sun, between Venus and Mars, with the silver moon shining on its oceans? There are bigger suns and planets than ours, but is there any with such wonderful heritage of life? And the earth is the home of mankind, full and beautiful and wonderful things. We are all rushing on, no man knows where, through the ocean of infinite space. We are spinning round at thousands of miles an hour. We are revolving round the sun at 18 miles a second. But so smooth is the motion, we feel neither the whirl nor the rush. On and on we go, and when the earth has revolved some 70 times round the sun, you, I, and each one of us must go perhaps on a still longer and more wonderful journey. But while we are in the world, let us try to explore its wonders and understand it, seeing in all things the wisdom and love of God, who made us out of a cloud of gas.